A note to our listeners before we get started. This story contains references to sexual abuse and suicide. Please listen with care.
Well, the problem is that poor Anne, when I'm cooking, I like to sing. And
Blue Rodeo was one of his favorite bands to sing to.
Because, like, when we got married, she didn't like to cook, so she sent me to George Brown for...
I was okay to cook. He doesn't eat food. He has a terrible relationship with
Yeah.
food. And when we got together, he was living on frozen dinners. Turkey dinner every night. 3 minutes in the microwave.
Yeah.
That was his food for the next 3 days.
Now she...
But I insisted on cooking. He said, no, you can't cook. You have to work.
Yeah. So I
sent him to cooking school.
I went to George Brown for a year?
2
years. To learn how to cook properly. And I enjoy it. I mean, I can't sing. But I like to cook. But I couldn't carry a tune in a backpack, duct tape to my head.
And as you're coming up the stairs, all you can hear is 5 days in May.
For those 5 days in May.
So you hear this wailing coming from the apartment.
Yep.
But hey, it's
But the happy look on his face is incredible. It was the best thing I ever did, sending you to cooking school.
yeah.
I'd like to learn to cook. Good idea. Go to school.
Find the face you've seen 1,000 times. Sometimes the world begins to set you up on your feet again, and no, it wipes the tears from your eyes. How will you ever know the way that circumstances go? Always gonna hit you by surprise.
This is The Ultimate Choice. I'm Rob Cribb.
I actually wasn't a person who always knew that I wanted to be a doctor.
Nav Prasad is a family doctor in Toronto, Canada. He was the one who first introduced me to Michael and Anne. His own journey into medicine, and especially medically assisted death, is complicated.
I was interested in other things. I was interested in physical sciences and physics. And it was really during university that my interest in medicine crystallized. Family medicine offers the ability to get to know people over time and to address a range of concerns. And the care that you provide can feel more meaningful when you know the person well and you know where they fit in their family, in their circle of friends, in society in general. And getting to know people definitely increases how rewarding the role is.
Nav and Michael are very different men. But the bond that grew between physician and patient over the years was undeniable. Michael spoke about Nav as he would a wise friend whose counsel he respected. And in return, Nav would often smile. He reflected on Michael's sense of humor and the ease of the conversations they shared. He knew more than just Michael's medical history. Nav knew Michael's ghosts. There was a childhood of unspeakable physical and sexual abuse. There was many failed encounters with the healthcare system, and there was a history of suicide attempts. Through all of that darkness, Nav saw Michael's remarkable warmth and empathy.
I do remember his sense of humor. I remember him always asking about me and how I was doing, which is not typical for my patients. And I remember even when he was going through hard things, he would, always have a wisecrack about it. And I also remember how he would, in a really nice way, volunteer information about others, about his partner, about people he was close to in his church. And I found that really endearing, and it was easy to feel really comfortable with him and really close.
I got to know Nav through other stories I've worked on. He knew this one would be controversial, but he reached out to me at the request of his patient.
He had a number of physical ailments that made it difficult for him to get around and to do the things that he wanted to do, such as helping out at the church, and also just going out and spending time with his partner, Anne, who he loved a lot. And he was always very effusive about how supportive Anne was. And that was actually part of what was difficult for him as his health declined, is, how much he came to rely on Anne and how he felt that he couldn't contribute as much as he used to. His physical condition deteriorated to the point where he found it difficult to stand for extended periods of time, and so he couldn't even cook or help to prepare meals, and he found that frustrating.
Michael had trouble standing because he was in a lot of pain. It was a combination of problems. There was his failing liver and back issues that got in the way of living a normal life. He had cooked almost every meal for Anne since they got together. Now he couldn't even do that anymore. By the time I met Michael, he couldn't even walk without a cane. He was getting weaker, and so was his voice. Sometimes it's hard to make out his words, even though we were sitting right next to each other.
I'm tired. I hurt. I sleep maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. My liver hurts. My kidneys hurt. It's just, I'm not getting any better. I'm on 40 milligrams of morphine a day. And plus I have a whole bunch of other medicines. Why should I bother? Why should I be here? This is my life. I can't even get downstairs. Excuse me. Hello.
Hello, Mrs. Fraser. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Are you okay?
No, not supposed to be 4 o'clock.
Before 4 o'clock?
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
No,
Michael's daily schedule involves a constant stream of PSWs, personal support workers.
Okay, then cancel because I just had a PSW leave.
They arrive each day to check in, help him with his personal care.
Yeah, 4 o'clock would be nice.
And in some cases, they became close. One of them even went beyond her paid duties to help him prepare some food in the afternoons. He completely relies on them, doesn't even want to imagine what it could mean to lose their support.
Right now I have 3 PSWs to come. In the hospital, I'd be lucky to get somebody to help me once a day.
After a lifetime of working with his hands and finding joy in his service to his church community, Michael's days were now spent in a reclining chair, reading a screen, or one of the hundreds of books that lined the walls of his small apartment. He was losing purpose.
He would sometimes tell a joke about not being around in the future. And, sometimes, depending on the circumstances and what else was going on in the conversation, I would let it pass. Other times I would ask him about it. And, then he would wave it off and say it was just a joke. Maybe he wasn't entirely serious either, but he wasn't fully joking. It was maybe testing out what it sounded like in his head and sounded like to say out loud, and maybe sounding me out to some extent to see how I would react.
For Nav, there's one session with Michael he'll never forget. They were talking about potential treatments for his pain.
It was in the context of talking about his frustration with the treatments and supports that had been offered that he asked about wanting to end his life and whether or not I could help. In an encounter like that, in my mind, I'm formulating a list of problems, and then for each problem, I'm thinking about all of the potential treatments or supports that could be offered. And it's hard to change gears from that to thinking about helping a patient end their life.
So you're there, you're a clinician, you're looking at the medical information in front of you, and suddenly they drop the nuclear bomb and say, none of this really matters to me anymore.
Yeah, and my first thought, which I didn't articulate, was just to offer new supports that I hadn't offered already, to think about whether there is an additional specialist who might be able to help, or a medication we haven't yet tried, although we tried many. But, I didn't articulate that because I knew, based on what he was saying and the way he was saying it, that he wasn't asking me for additional suggestions. He was asking me for something completely different.
It was a total mental shift for you.
Yes.
And so now, suddenly, you're no longer a doctor or somebody who's helping facilitate care and access to programs. You're a counselor. You're counseling him at that point.
Different situations call for different approaches. And, sometimes people come into the clinic with a condition that has a simple treatment. You have pneumonia, I prescribe you these antibiotics, and you get better in most circumstances. I was still playing the physician role, but very different from just trying to suggest new treatments for pain. And instead, we were talking about a much more important decision that I see had already been made.
You knew him for 10 years, and I think that you really liked him and that you cared about him deeply. Why didn't you try to talk him out of it? Wasn't that your instinct?
If it was up to me, he would not have sought MAID. If it was up to me, he would not have wanted to seek MAID. But it's not up to me. That's not my role. And it's funny, this term of playing God. Sometimes doctors are criticized for playing God. I think in the case of MAID, playing God would be saying no to a person. Then you would be deciding when and if a person dies, whereas affirming a person's decision is understanding your true role, which is much less important than any decision one of your patients makes.
Michael had an affordable apartment that was rent-controlled. He lived there for decades on social assistance. There's no way he and Anne could afford to move. But the apartment was no longer suitable for him.
And in a perfect world, he would have been able to stay where he was comfortable, but in a physical space that allowed him to be more active. Michael's not the only person who said that disability and social assistance payments are not enough. It's very difficult to understand how a person can get by. And I remember him telling me, going through the various options, like when he was looking at, a long-term care facility or paying for more support, he was talking about whether or not he would have enough money to buy a pizza once a month, as a treat.
Nav carefully explained the options to Michael. There was either palliative care or long-term care.
He explained those were options. But to me, I'm sorry, I've worked in church for years. I was with the minister and visited people, congregation members in long-term care. And what long-term care means is that you basically get up in the morning. If you're lucky, they'll change you. And then they put you in a wheelchair in front of the nurse station. And what kind of life is that? To me, it's quality of life. I mean, like, I'm not a hero. I'm doing this for my own reasons. I mean, I understand there are people who have cancer or ALS or whatever, and they're fighting tooth and nail. And I respect them for that. But that's not me. You know, that's just not me.
Nav listened to Michael, and then he chose his next words carefully. He told Michael he didn't have to justify his decision to him, aside from meeting the legal requirements for a medically assisted death.
And part of meeting the criteria is ensuring that reasonable efforts have been taken to ensure that the person is not suffering, and to verify that the suffering is truly irremediable. But other than that, I tried not to challenge Michael in his decision, but instead just to try to understand it.
How did you come to navigate all of these incredibly fraught, vexing ethical issues, given the fact that when you became a doctor, none of this was legal? This just happened. It feels like we've had this legislation for 10 minutes. So you woke up one day in 2016, and suddenly this was legal, and you're a physician who has to now deal with it. And you're not trained on what to do when a patient comes to you and says, I'd like to end my life. You read the legislation. The legislation is clinical and legal and bureaucratic, but it doesn't help you to answer the existential questions, right?
I think, like in many things, I learned from patients. I think patients can be the best teachers. So when I was a medical student completing my medical training, my residency, it never would have anticipated being involved in MAID. Never would have anticipated that I would intentionally administer lethal substances to a patient.
Michael feels trapped. He's having seizures. He can no longer go outside. He's made up his mind.
The one thing psychiatrists and I had a long talk about the assessment is that I'm not doing this for mental health reasons. And that's really important to understand. This is not the mental health system that I'm doing MAID with. It's my physical health.
One of your challenges about being trapped in here is there's no elevator, can't go out, can't go down the stairs. Let's imagine. As I'm listening to him, I have a strong urge to ask him that question that's tugging at me. I just had to know, what would it take to change his mind? What if there was an elevator?
That would be really nice. But when it comes right down to it, I'm still going to be sick. There's nothing the doctors can do. So all the money in the world, it really isn't going to help me because nothing will change. But no amount of money would, at this point, to get me to change my mind. I don't have to suffer anymore. And I don't have to do Plan B.
Michael's Plan B is suicide. It kicks in if his request for MAID is denied.
I don't want to do that. because of the people I've hurt. I mean, I've tried suicide before, and I'm really bad at it. And what I don't want is a bunch of people who love me thinking, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? Is there something we could have done? But this way, you know what's going to happen. And you don't have to do anything that, just confuses you or tears you apart. I mean, the good thing is it's my choice. To tell you the truth, I used to be a big daydreamer. I would also daydream about, okay, well, if Anne and I won the lottery, what would we do? We'd, get a house or whatever. But since I've made the final decision, I don't daydream anymore. Because I know that there's an end time. It's not that I'm taking this not as seriously as it is. I've just come to the conclusion that it's time. And it's what I want. And I've got a choice, which is a big thing.
Sometimes in these intimate conversations I've been having with Anne and Michael, I'd get lost. I'd forget that we're talking about a man's decision to die, because part of me can't really fathom it. For days after each of these meetings, I'd find myself thinking obsessively about things Michael had said about his life and the indignities that led him to decide it was no longer worth living. Near the end of one of those meetings, he surprised me in a way I will never forget.
I mean, I'll say this, but if anybody wants to come on Saturday.
Just days before he was scheduled to end his life, he issued a unique invitation.
So, I mean, if you guys want to come on Saturday.
At the service.
What about this Saturday? If you guys want to come this Saturday, you're welcome to.
I'm okay with that. You've seen me cry already.
Can I think about that?
Yeah, that's fine.
He's just putting it out there.
I'm putting it out there.
Extraordinary offer.
If you feel uncomfortable about it or whatever, you don't have to. But I mean, you don't have to answer now. You don't have to do whatever. You're just welcome.
I've never had an invitation like that before.
I'm sorry.
Well, there's a first for everything.
It's
Okay. I'm gonna get back to you.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'll see you Thursday. Let's talk about it Thursday.
Yeah, we'll talk about it Thursday, but I mean, don't feel any pressure. Just,
Yeah, no,
I mean, I'm just putting it out there.
I'm grateful. Believe me, I'm grateful. It's a real honor. Thank you.
Coming up next on The Ultimate Choice, Michael and Anne prepare for an unusual party. This season of The Ultimate Choice is reported by me, Rob Cribb. Written by Suzanne Reber and myself, and produced by Suzanne Reber and Bruce Edwards, who also mixed and sound designed our show. Allison Leighton Brown composed our theme and original music. Field recordings by Damien Kearns, Ian Thompson, and Bruce Edwards. Jess Alvarenga is our associate producer. Additional reporting by Masi Kalatbari, Declan Keogh, and Max Loslow at the Investigative Journalism Bureau. The Ultimate Choice was created by our executive producer, Suzanne Reber. Our show is a production of TVO Today in partnership with Piz Gloria Productions, the Investigative Journalism Bureau, and the Toronto Star. Our team at TVO includes Shahriar Tajvidi, managing editor of podcasts and digital video, Lori Few, executive producer of digital, and John Ferry, vice president of programming and content. Special thanks to Anne-Marie Owens, editor of the Toronto Star, and thanks also to Blue Rodeo for the use of their iconic song. 5 Days in May is performed by Blue Rodeo, courtesy of Warner Music Canada, by arrangement with Warner Music Group Film and TV Licensing. If you enjoyed listening to The Ultimate Choice and believe in this kind of deeply reported and immersive storytelling, we'd be grateful if you give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.